Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Many people have praised the Netflix documentary American Murder, The Family Next Door for being authentic, for being one of the best representations thus far of the Watts family murders. Basically, all of the content kind of comes from the archive of body cam footage and social media, and that has actually stunned a lot of people. A lot of people who are unfamiliar with the Watts case have been impressed, shocked, intrigued, and very, I guess, triggered in a way by the authenticity of this case. And I think what the Watts case kind of has ushered in is the sort of new era of true crime where there are certainly going to be some people who, like Shan'ann Watts, live their lives on social media, and because of that you have all of this technicolor sketching of the victims. And so because social media was so active and it was public, and it was also kept public for a long time, it's no longer public, but it was public for a very long time, and because of that people got unusually familiar with the victims. And in this case it was a few victims. It was Shan'ann, a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, and both her children who were also grandchildren. And because of this unusual intimacy between true crime victims in a true crime case, the public really, I think, became very, very interested in the Watts case. People not generally interested in true crime have gotten interested in true crime. I also think that the Netflix documentary is one of the best documentaries, if not the best. I think it sort of is almost on a par with Criminal Confessions, where Agent Tammy Lee appeared and spoke about the interrogation and so on. But having said that, people familiar with the case have said that they didn't really learn much new. There wasn't really much that they learned in the documentary. To be honest, even though I've written a couple of books on the Watts case, starting with TWO FACE, The Man Underneath Christopher Watts, and I feel like I know probably more than the average person does on the Watts case, I always appreciate these documentaries because invariably something new comes to light. There's usually just something somewhere that's a photo you haven't seen before or whatever. And I really appreciate this documentary because some critical information has come to light that we didn't know. For example, Shanann's last text. And one's got to ask, why didn't we know that? Like, why is that not in the phone data review? I mean, it's her very last text. Why? It's like it's quite crucial information. So why don't we have it? In this episode, I'm going to talk about something else, though. I did talk about the text in another episode. In this episode, I want to talk about the letter, and I'm going to do something a little bit unusual. I'm going to criticize this documentary a little bit in terms of this letter. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed, please do like, share, leave a comment. If you do share, for example, on Twitter, use the hashtag TCRS. And let's get started. So even before the Netflix documentary came out, I noticed in the trailer that the Facebook page that is kind of the opening frame of the documentary isn't what Shanann's Facebook page actually looked like. Many of us had access to it when it was public, and just kind of an obvious thing is Shanann's profile picture kind of faced the other way. So that was kind of an obvious thing. But there are other things as well. Just that kind of already showed me you are probably going to have other things that aren't going to be accurate in this documentary, and look out for that. There were a couple of, I wouldn't call them necessarily inaccuracies, but some of the texts that were shown just aren't time stamped, which to me is a little unnecessary, just because we know that information, we know exactly when these things were sent. Maybe for narrative efficacy, they didn't do that, because there's sort of not a voiceover, but you hear Nicole Atkinson doing the 911 call while other things are happening, and obviously that's not happening when other things are happening, such as when Shan'ann arrives at home at 01:48. But it's done just to, tell the story. I want to talk about the letter Shan'ann wrote to her husband on August 9th. It was sort of, he'd shown a little bit more interest in her and seemed to be the old Chris. He seemed a bit more loving, and so Shan'ann kind of went into gear. She ordered him a book on Amazon. She booked a trip, like a couple's getaway to Aspen. That would have been the next weekend. And then she wrote this letter. And we've always only gotten the first page of the letter, and that's in the Discovery. That is in the phone data review. That's something that Shan'ann took a photo of and sent to Sarah Nutt, but she never sent the second page. I've spoken a little bit about that second page in another video. In this episode, I want to talk about the first page and kind of the letter itself. So the contents of the letter are fairly consistent in terms of what Netflix showed. So in other words, what Shan'ann wrote, the contents, the words, are pretty accurate, but not word for word. There are a couple of inconsistencies. The fact is, though, the letter shown in the Netflix documentary isn't the letter that Shan'ann wrote. And it is almost suggesting that the Netflix documentary is almost suggesting that they actually got access to the original letter, which they, I don't know if they did. If they did, why not use it? But you can see that it's not Shanann's handwriting. And it's not the original letter. It's not the letter that she took a photo of. And there are a couple of things that we can see are different. So in general, the letter in the documentary's got kind of a margin with 3 lines, right? There's 3 lines running down the left-hand margin, 3 parallel lines. Whereas in Shanann's letter, there are just 2. The other thing, and I guess the thing that I pointed out, in previous analysis to my patrons, was just, because we dealt with this in the phone data review, that even in the opening couple of words to her husband, she misspells dearest. She spells it initially Deerest, and then she scratches over the E. And we've seen another love letter today. I don't want to nitpick, but we've seen another love letter today from Suzanne Morphew to her husband, and it's sort of flawless. And nothing's been crossed out. It's kind of a work of art. You put some care and time into it, right? And Shan'ann kind of makes a mistake in the very second word, but she carries on regardless, right? If you think about it, just in a sensitive way, in a compassionate way, in a fair way, in a reasonable way, if you wanted to write a letter to save your marriage, I'm not saying you must not, you're going to lose your marriage because you made a spelling mistake. If you, scratch a letter out, your husband is going to decide, okay, well, you did that, I'm done. So that's not what I'm talking about. Just that also when you love someone and you want to write something that's going to touch them, you want it to kind of be a work of art. You want it to be sort of flawless. And so it is interesting that Netflix kind of go with a flawless letter, but it's fake. It's not the letter that Shan'ann actually wrote. And we see in the letter that she wrote, it starts, "My dearest Chris," and there's a heart, not "My dearest Chris!" exclamation mark. There's a big difference between just that. Also, the word dearest is with a small letter D in a Netflix documentary. In Shanann's handwriting, it's a capital letter D. The fact that there's a heart next to his name compared to a question mark is totally different. A heart is showing love and affection. Exclamation mark is really just showing emphasis. It's different. In terms of the handwriting, it definitely isn't Shanann's handwriting. You can see that the letter M is very different. The M has sort of got a sort of curved, going from lower to higher kind of relief. In the mock-up on Netflix, and Shanann's is a more jagged M. The Y's are similar, and it does look like the Y's being sort of imitated, perhaps. It's also interesting in Shanann's letter that Chris has written quite kind of small. The H is fairly small. The what do you call it? The vertical part of the H on the left hand side doesn't go very high, although that's true in most of her H's anyway. But anyway, the point is that the handwriting is not the same. It's not the same person. There are a couple of other differences, and I'm not going to go into a terrible amount of detail because Netflix isn't it's not like it's not fraud, it's not a misrepresentation. It's just, I think they didn't have the actual letter and they wanted just to show that a letter was written. But there are some differences, and if you're going to be authentic, maybe go to a little bit more trouble to get it right, because you do have the original first page. How hard would that be to imitate, People in true crime care about these details. So just to go through a couple of points, the word lost is on the second line in the Netflix letter. In Shannann's original, lost is still in the first line. So I'm just saying you can clearly see that is, they haven't kept it exactly the same. There's another difference where she talks about, I missed your morning breath, your touch, your lips / kisses, right? And this is where I feel the documentary takes unnecessary license, because it's totally unnecessary to deviate from the evidence, from the actual letter. It's totally unnecessary, and it's actually more than unnecessary. It's incorrect. It's inaccurate. So where Shan'ann writes, I missed your morning breath, your touch, your lips / kisses. I missed holding you. The Netflix letter says, I missed your morning breath, your touch, your lips against mine. I miss holding you. In the second sentence or so, she says, I can't even explain how hard this pain is. The Netflix letter, I can't even explain how hard this pain hurts. Why make these changes? Shannann's letter, the last 5 weeks have been the hardest. The Netflix letter, the last 5 weeks have been so hard. So I'm not going to take it further. I'm not going to kind of analyze all the differences, just to show you that there are quite a few silly little differences that are totally unnecessary. Now, I can tell you that probably in the future, in the sort of post-truth analysis of this case, you'll have probably some people analyzing her handwriting and analyzing this letter. And there are probably going to be a lot of people analyzing the wrong letter. And it's just totally unnecessary. You're going to get sort of, by mistake, people doing kind of analysis and trying to explain certain things based on something that isn't actually the original. And it's just totally unnecessary. I did notice, I expected when the Netflix documentary came out and they were advertising this letter, I was expecting that they were going to spend a bit of time on it. And what they did was they do like a flyby of the letter. It's sort of so quick that you can't really see what's being written. And all they really want to do is highlight one or two sentences in a paragraph and then in another page and then move on, right? That's fine, but it's still giving you a little bit of a false impression. I'm talking about the part that isn't highlighted, where people are interested, well, what did Shan'ann actually write here? And so all I'm saying is, we kind of expect higher standards. If you're going to go to the trouble to make a film, get the details right. There are thousands of people, maybe even millions, who know about these details and won't really be happy. And it's just totally unnecessary. You've got the information, get it right. And this applies to this particular aspect in the documentary. I think overall they did a really good job. This part is just a little bit unnecessary. The Facebook page, on the one hand you can say, well, they didn't have the original to work with because it's been set to private. On the other hand, there are people who had screen grabs and pictures of the original page, but that they chose to represent it the way that they did. I just think in true crime you need to be far more focused on getting the details right, and you might want to in future talk to people very close to the case to sort of go through what you have to make sure it's accurate, because you only shoot yourself in the foot when you show yourself to getting the details wrong or not being as accurate as you could be about details when that information is out there. I think it is a valid thing to say 2 years later, when something comes out, what do we know that's new? What kind of new information comes out there? And you'll find in the media and in marketing, whenever a new sort of book or documentary comes out, the question is, what is new? What is new about it? What is coming into the narrative that we don't already know, right? And you're only going to kind of get that information from people who've been at the heart of it. And a couple of things that are relatively new are the letters Chris Watts wrote to Cheryl and Cadel. That wasn't addressed at all in the documentary. The sale of Anadarko to Occidental, that wasn't mentioned at all. The destruction of the Survey 319 site, that wasn't mentioned at all. What the 2825 Saratoga trial actually looks like now. And I don't know if this was a response, but there's certain people like the Lindstroms could have provided photos, and also, I think they had some of the last photos of the family and of the children that could also have added to the narrative. They came forward in August. That could also have been part of the documentary. It wasn't either. But despite these criticisms, overall it was done very well, and it did its job in communicating to the mainstream in a quite a streamlined way the basic truth of what happened in the Watts case, and for that they can be commended. For those interested in the Amanda Knox case, doing a review of the timeline, so you can head to Twitter, go to the hashtag 13 years ago today MK for Meredith Kircher, or you can go to the hashtag Amanda Knox, and every day I'll just be providing some insight into the timeline. I have written a couple of books on Amanda Knox, starting with Deceit. If you'd like to read my work on the Watts case, you could do worse than TWO FACE Annihilation. I'll leave a link to that in the description. I'm going to follow up this video tomorrow with a video about Suzanne Morphew and that letter, and just talking kind of in general about how some of these letters are used in situations like this. I'm not talking about how the Chris Watts letter was used, but how the letter in the circumstances of the Suzanne Morphew case are sometimes used to try to make the case for innocence. So I'm going to talk about that in the next episode, I think, on this channel. I think that's going to be quite interesting. So stay tuned. If you haven't subscribed, please do like, share, leave a comment. If you do share, use the hashtag TCRS. Thank you for listening.